Hey, what's up? How are you? Welcome to another tutorial here on my channel, Road Studio. In this tutorial, we are going to analyze this project that was inspired by the EP of White Eyes by Cabizbajo. White Eyes is a hypnotic and minimalist piece with a dark and enveloping groove. Each element creates atmospheric tension and an immersive experience.
Acid is my DNA. Acid is my DNA. Acid is my DNA. Acid is my DNA. Acid is my DNA.
Let's listen to each of the instruments that make up this sound design of the drums. Considering that White Ice is an EP with a dark groove, I decided to focus the sound design on the rave style. To find percussive samples for your sound design, I recommend looking on Splice for genres like G-House or Bass House. So far, everything was going well with the selection of samples, but I still felt it lacked character. To generate this missing character, I turned to look for a saturation and distortion plugin. I decided to use the external plugin Thermal, which is an audio distortion and saturation effect, and in the search and testing of some presets, I found one that gave it the character I was looking for. I decided to compress all my drums very subtly, and with the EQ edge, it performs the function of cutting with a low-pass filter and high-pass filter.
Acid is my DNA.
For the synth bass, I used the external virtual instrument Omnisphere 2, as is customary on this channel. I used a typical sawtooth oscillator. I subtly increased the shape. When it comes to an instrument where I'm only interested in playing a single note constantly and avoiding one note overlapping with another, I use the synth mode in solo. Then I activate the arpeggiator tool, where I generated a rhythmic pattern. In instrument D, by default, I already have a noise oscillator assigned. The noise will make my synth generate an analog texture. Then we move on to activate the filter. It is important to set the envelope of my filter this way. A detail to mention is that in the filter mode I am using, it is the low-pass filter power 24 decibels. This filter is affecting both instruments, A and D, thanks to the option in Omnisphere to share parameters from instrument A to the rest of the instruments B, C, and D. At this point, my synth bass, like my drums, was lacking some aggressiveness and character, as it should be for this dark genre aimed at the rave scene. First, I start by cutting a little the low frequencies with the EQ edge. With the glue compressor, I generate a bit of pressure on the entire body of the synth bass. With the first thermal, I decide to use the same preset as the thermal of my kick, so it would have that same combination of character and styles in the low frequencies. The reason I used a second thermal is because I felt it lacked character. I could have just increased the dry wet of my first thermal, but I wasn't convinced, so I wanted to experiment with another preset. This is very rare for me to use this technique, but in the end it worked very well. And finally, this equalizer performs the function of a low-pass filter and high-pass filter. Here I have a series of automations. On the part of Omnisphere, I automate the shape parameters, which subtly transform the waveform of my sawtooth oscillator. Additionally, I automate the cutoff, where opening this parameter makes it a bit more aggressive, as it allows mid and high frequencies to enter, and this helps me create a bit more tension in certain parts. And finally, the release of my amplifier envelope, where it lengthens the sound each time the cutoff is opened. The last three automations are linked to the high-pass filter cutoff, as well as its cue, and the last one to the low-pass filter. For the synthesis of this instrument, I use two instruments, which are the wavetable and the analog. Ableton allows you to use one or more instruments on the same MIDI channel through the instrument rack. I used the sine wave oscillator, in which I distorted its shape through the fault parameter. Then I activate the filter without linking it to the envelope, but I do automate the frequency, which we will analyze later. In the analog instrument, I was only interested in using the noise oscillator over the wavetable instrument. In the audio effects, I started by adding the pedal infuse mode, which will give a very aggressive distortion color. When generating distortion with the pedal, it increases the low frequencies, which I don't need for this sound design, so I decided to remove it using the edge equalizer with a high-pass filter cut. I decided to copy the same two thermal from my synth bass to maintain the same style and character. The following edge equalizer only performs the function of cutting, in this case a low-pass filter. I add the native audio effect echo at a quarter rate in ping-pong mode, And finally, I add reverb to this synthesizer. Now let's analyze the automations, especially in the reverb effect. When entering the breakdown stage, I try to create a perspective that this instrument is in the background, so I need to execute some automations, as my idea is for this instrument to move from back to front as we approach the drop. First, I start with the QH to execute the low-pass filter cut. The reverb effect parameters I automate are the dry-wet, the pre-delay, and the stereo image.
This shit is my DNA.
To keep the video from being too long, I will show you other instruments that make up this production.
This shit is my DNA. This shit. This shit. This shit is my DNA.
We've reached the end of this video tutorial. Remember that you can download this Ableton project on my Patreon, Gumroad, and Shopify pages. With nothing more to say, see you in the next video.